Investigators, hoping to solve a difficult murder case, have a creeping suspicion about who did it. But to catch the killer, they must first trap their witnesses. Detectives at the scene of a young woman's murder learn that the best tool to capture her killer may be a dustpan. Everyone's a suspect when a woman is murdered in her hotel room.
God, what's happening?
Investigators look to the killer's own hand to prove his guilt. In the absence of human bystanders, sometimes insects or even microbes can provide the most objective testimony. When death doesn't come by natural causes, solving it often depends upon a natural witness.
David 31.
In this case, some of the names have been changed.
Missing person report.
On August 4th, 1982, the Ventura County, California Sheriff's Department received a call about a missing woman. When 25-year-old Marcy Davis hadn't been heard from in almost 2 days, her sister became worried. Several hours later, the department received a call about a vehicle stuck and abandoned in a ditch. A check of the plates revealed that it belonged to Marcy Davis. There was no sign of her. She might have walked away to find help and possibly run into worse trouble. Or someone else may have ditched the vehicle. The cold engine made it impossible to determine how long it had been there. A pair of women's jeans found nearby suggested foul play. But the place was used as a dumping ground for all sorts of trash. Because the car provided the first real clue to Marcy Davis's fate, Ventura County sheriffs scoured the scene to see what else they might find. They prepared for the worst. They found it. Assigned to the case was Sergeant Larry Robertson.
The patrol division had decided that they should bring in a search and rescue team to look for the body. In fact, they did find the body. She had been found strangled and left nude, buried under leaves and debris.
Have you called forensics?
Marcy Davis's blouse had been torn and tied tightly around her neck. It appeared she might have been raped. The forensics team photographed any clues they could find in the gloom, but decided to abandon the scene until daylight. A guard was posted to keep it secure. Investigators had plenty of other work to do before sunrise.
Hey, have you seen my cigarettes? Can I take yours?
The victim's sister told police that Marcy had left the house on the night of August 3rd to go to a Tupperware party. She said that afterward she was going to JJ's, her favorite hangout.
Buy you more Tupperware?
Yes.
Hi, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. Came by, we wanted to ask you a
Detectives
couple
talked to the
questions
bartender
about,
at JJ's.
Can you describe the men she was with?
She told them that the victim had come in around 11 the night she disappeared.
Meets with her friends.
She said that Davis was drinking and playing pool with another bar regular named Michael Nottingham. They left with all the other patrons around closing time, 2 a.m. Because Nottingham was the last person the victim had been with, investigators went to see him.
At the time, we feared that perhaps Michael Nottingham was with her, and he also had been a homicide victim. And we just hadn't found his body yet. So, number one, we were trying to establish whether or not his well-being could be verified.
They found him safe at home. He agreed to come to the station to talk. They showed him a photograph of Marcy that her sister provided.
That's Teresa.
He recognized the face, but not the name.
She told her her name is Teresa? That's what she said.
He knew her as Teresa.
This is...
She gave him a ride home, came in for about 10 minutes, then left. That's the last he saw of her, he said.
Wait, license is suspended? No, just don't have a call.
Nottingham told them that after she drove off around 3 a.m., he walked to his girlfriend's house and crashed outside until her mother left at 9:30. He said that nobody saw him during that time. After Nottingham gave his statement, police went to the house he shared with his sister. They wanted to speak with her to see if she could confirm his alibi. She recognized the face in the picture as a woman Michael came home with the other night. She corroborated his account of the time spent at home, up to a point. She said he introduced the woman as Kelly, and that wasn't the only difference.
She recalled that Michael and Kelly both got into her car and left together. Obviously, this was very different from the statements that Michael had given to us.
The sheriff's department now had a conflicting story and a 6-hour gap in Michael Nottingham's alibi.
Be the right foot sticking up.
Okay.
As seen.
Suspicion was building, but they had nothing solid.
Direct a couple of that's where we are. Some cigarettes.
Any forensic clues found in the victim's car would only support Nottingham's account that he'd been in it.
Go up and give us some aerials.
Investigators needed something to prove that Nottingham had been at the crime scene.
Right about here. Okay. And the body's up here.
Okay.
Okay, now what's going on?
Okay. What I found
By the light of day, investigators returned to the scene to search for any clues to link him there. The lengthy process left no stone or leaf unturned.
While processing this scene, I sat on the ground in the immediate vicinity of the body, and as we were taking leaf and branches off one at a time looking for evidence, I sat on the ground next to the body for, I would say, at least an hour, perhaps an hour and a half.
Yeah, with this we found about 6 feet away from the vehicle, cigarette butts.
Investigators found a
We
tentative
also got an
clue,
imprint, so in the same area as the
a
cigarette.
filterless cigarette butt on the ground near the abandoned vehicle matched Nottingham's brand. The clue was weak, but coupled with the conflicting stories, it allowed police to arrest Nottingham on suspicion of rape and murder.
Taken the last time he was arrested.
All they had to do now was prove it. Nottingham was taken into custody. As a matter of course, for cases of sexual assault, he was stripped and photographed.
Take off your shirt for us.
Investigators looked for scratches, scrapes, or any other evidence to indicate he may have struggled with his victim. They found something else entirely.
What about the,
As many as 100 small and unusual insect bites dotted his ankles and waistline. Nottingham said they were flea bites. Investigators weren't sure of their significance, but they documented the marks just in case. That night, Sergeant Robertson was awakened by itching around his ankles and waist. He recognized the unforgettable symptoms.
I told my wife if I didn't know better, I would say that these bites on me that itched profusely were chigger bites, and they were just exactly like the chigger bites I had experienced in guerrilla warfare training in Kentucky during the Vietnam era.
These are the sites where they normally attack.
After his physician confirmed his diagnosis, detectives wondered if these little creatures could somehow provide their big break.
I've got a hole in here.
They needed an expert's advice.
Swelling, itching, and sometimes a fever.
Proper moaning medium. Onto the slide.
They consulted entomologist James Webb, who specializes in parasitic insects. He told them that chiggers are larvae, the newly hatched spawn of a certain group of mites. They're born with a voracious appetite and are adept at procuring their meal.
And they insert their mouth parts into the host's skin, and then with this special blade, there's one on each side, and then they'll actually inject saliva into the wound, and the saliva then dissolves the protein of the skin, and that pool of liquid then is actually sucked into the chigger with a special gut pump. It brings the material into the intestine, into the gut of the chigger.
The saliva triggers the host's immune system, causing a red, itchy bump around the bite, usually within 24 to 48 hours. A survey of the investigators who searched the scene of Marcy Davis's murder revealed that most bore the telltale marks of a chigger attack.
It's not by the individual bite that we recognize the chigger bite. We recognize it more as a pattern, and usually at a place where there's constriction of clothing. Because when the chigger moves up the body, it'll stop along the sock line, or the panty line, or the underwear line, or the belt line.
Out of a case with no real clues, a pattern began to emerge. Michael Nottingham's bite marks were carefully photographed again at life size. It appeared the murder might have had dozens of witnesses after all. Investigators hoped that by catching chiggers, they could catch Marcy Davis's killer.
I think we can do it before the sun
Suspect
goes in.
Michael Nottingham swore he'd never been to the area where the victim's body was found. Sergeant Larry Robertson believed the chigger bites on Nottingham's body might tell a different story.
But I had never ever experienced chiggers in all my years of living in Ventura County. Even though I was active in search and rescue and hunting and fishing, I had never heard of chiggers in Ventura County, had never seen them, and had never read about them in Ventura County.
In fact, they were exceedingly rare in this part of California. If investigators could isolate chiggers to the crime scene, they would have undeniable proof that Nottingham had been there. They called on Dr. Webb for help.
The thing we wanted to do at the crime scene was see if there were chigger mites there to substantiate this hypothesis. And we knew that lizards are good indicators of finding chiggers.
Chiggers attach to lizards and feed off them. Traps were laid to catch the lizards for examination. Once they were found to be infested, Webb and his team broke out the chigger traps. A chigger trap is nothing more than a small black plastic plate that's placed where chiggers are likely to gather. The sun heats it up, providing a warm welcome for the pesky larvae. These creatures are hungry, not smart.
This thing is a warm body, much like a living animal. And so the chiggers, if they're in the vicinity, will move towards the plate and crawl around on the plate, looking for a place to attach.
Webb's team set their traps outside the house of Nottingham's girlfriend, where Nottingham claimed he spent the night sleeping. They placed more traps 20 feet away from the murder scene, and others even closer to the spot where the victim had been found. They checked the traps every half hour during daylight for 3 days. The results were clear.
Not too far from the murder scene where the body was found, we were getting 10s or 20 or more at a time running around in the black plate. I mean, just large numbers. We also noticed them running around in our shoes when we were standing in that same spot and crawling up onto us.
But just 20 feet away from the body, the chigger activity was minimal. And at the girlfriend's house, they found none at all.
Okay, good.
The proximity of the chiggers to the victim established Nottingham's presence at the crime scene.
I believe from our research, this was the first time that entomology had ever been used in a capital case or murder case to assist investigators in placing the suspect at the scene of the crime.
From what police could piece together, the victim drove Nottingham to the woods. Maybe she wanted to go, maybe he forced her to go there. Once there, they began to fight. It escalated, and Nottingham beat and killed her, finally strangling her with her shirt. Michael Nottingham was convicted of attempted rape and the first-degree murder of Marcy Davis. He was sentenced to life without possibility of parole. Danger can lurk on the outskirts of town, or it may lurk even closer to home. Seattle, Washington. Once a rugged forest land, now it's a world-class city of 500,000. Some people come here to take advantage of new opportunities. Others come here just to take advantage. 28-year-old Molly McClure had grown up in Seattle and had been away a few years. In October 1985, she moved back to be closer to her family. She rented a modest apartment and found a job she loved as a hotel restaurant consultant. In January 1986, she called the police to report an attempted break-in at her apartment. Her upstairs neighbor, Sherwood Knight, told her he'd seen someone trying to jimmy her window while he was out for his morning jog. He scared the intruder off. The tampering on the window was plain to see. The police made out a report. That seemed like the end of it. But the next day, January 17th, police were called once again to McClure's apartment. They arrived there at the request of her boss, who had phoned them when she failed to show up for work and didn't answer her phone. Officers found her door locked and noticed what appeared to be some new damage to the window. Fearing that McClure might be in trouble, the officers slipped inside. They saw no signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, in the bedroom, they found Molly McClure murdered in her bed.
Headquarters, we got a homicide over here. I'm gonna make the detective.
Does it seem to be working that way?
Homicide was called in. Detective Hank Gruber was assigned to the case.
The young lady was laying face down on the bed, and she was partly covered with a blanket, but her head was exposed. She had obvious wounds to the back of her head. There was a gag in her mouth with panties, and they were tied with a sock.
The medical examiner was able to tell from the hemorrhages in the victim's eyes that she had been strangled. From the degree to which blood had pooled in her body, the ME could tell she had been dead 4 or 5 hours. While the apartment was processed for fingerprints or any other clues, the medical examiner carefully collected visible fibers and loose hairs from the body. The intensity of the crime scene processing was momentarily broken. Sherwood Knight came by to return a cookbook he'd borrowed.
The neighbor from upstairs?
How you doing? We're just doing a little checking around here. May I have your name?
He was concerned about Molly and stunned to hear that she was dead.
Oh, this is a book I got.
I'll tell you what, I'd like to do some more talking.
The detective sent him on his way and went back to processing the scene. The Washington State Crime Lab would scrutinize the trace evidence they gathered. Detectives hoped that the solution to this case, if it existed at all, lay somewhere in these small bags.
We had no idea who did this. It wasn't like there were any witnesses or anything to go on, and the case was easily recognized as a case that, if it was going to be solved, would have to be done with trace evidence.
Whoever had tried to invade McClure's apartment the night before had evidently returned to finish what he'd started. From the looks of it, Molly McClure's killer came in through the window of the spare bedroom. There, investigators found a footprint on the sill that didn't match the officer's shoes. This was their first clue that was bigger than a hair, and it needed to be preserved. After the sill was photographed, technicians collected it.
If you can actually take the item that has the print on it, you have a way better chance of being successful in comparisons than through pictures. The actual item is always better. So we took the windowsill at that time, and we had our samples from around the house.
The print on the windowsill had to wait until investigators could find a shoe to compare it with. While the trace evidence was being analyzed, detectives sought to find rhyme or reason for the crime. The curious thing was why the culprit made 2 attempts to enter the victim's apartment. Detectives thought that McClure might have been a victim of circumstance. The couple that lived in the apartment before her had a history of domestic violence.
Can I help you?
The boyfriend had moved out several months earlier. Police theorized that he might have returned to kill his former girlfriend, not realizing that she too had moved away.
Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah, she's here. Hey, Christy, you want to come on out?
But when police paid him a visit, they found the couple had reconciled.
Hi.
Though the victim's apartment wasn't ransacked, police noticed her jewelry box was empty. A check of bank records showed that the victim's cash machine card was used at an ATM several blocks away around the time of her death. So in addition to murder and rape, the killer had come there to rob. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the rapist's blood was type O, but so was the victim's. No more detailed analysis could be performed on the samples. The medical examiner sent the trace evidence from the sheets to the state crime lab, where it was analyzed by supervising forensic scientist Chesterine Swicklick, now with Swicklick and Associates. She can tell a great deal from small fibers.
Everybody has the characteristics of the debris on them. Everybody has just particles and fibers which may be found on nobody else in the world. We shed our hairs. We go to work and pick up fibers from the seat that we're sitting on, and we may pick up, if the person who worked there with us has a dog and deposited dog hairs on that seat, we pick up some of those dog hairs, and it then becomes part of our set of debris.
Every time we're in contact with someone, we swap some of our debris. At a crime scene, it's up to forensics to determine whose is whose. Swicklick identified a piece of lint from clothing, blue synthetic fibers, a flake of tobacco removed from under the victim's fingernail, some cat hair, and 18 fragments of dark human hair. She determined that characteristics of the hair suggested it was from an African American. It was definitely not that of blonde, blue-eyed Molly McClure. Detectives returned to the scene to collect more clues. The debris didn't seem like the victim's, as she was also a non-smoker who was allergic to cats. But if the killer had left these traces, they would be concentrated around the victim and not elsewhere in the apartment. They collected samples of the debris from the floor of each room, moving to the corners where it tends to gather. They found no cat fur, no tobacco, no African American hairs. A picture of the killer was emerging out of the dust. He could have been an anonymous intruder or someone closer to home. In a murder investigation, it's easier to eliminate familiar faces before looking for new suspects. Sherwood Knight, who had frightened off the burglar at the victim's window, had been helpful in the investigation, but detectives ran a check on him anyway. Gruber's partner, Detective Rudy Sutlovich, discovered that Knight had a record.
And he had a history of robberies and burglaries and other assaults. And he had been released from prison approximately 3 months prior to this.
Thank you very much. Officer Smith here with me.
Detectives paid a visit to Sherwood Knight and his girlfriend. The couple lived in the apartment above the victims. Knight's girlfriend told detectives that they had had a fight the night McClure was murdered. Sherwood slept on the couch. She told police that she woke around 5:30 a.m.
I don't think so.
Knight was already out for his morning jog. He came home a short time later, wearing his jogging clothes like he always did. Then he rushed off for his class at North Seattle Community College.
He was enrolled there, but nobody could ever remember seeing him. Didn't go to his classes or anything, but he had been telling his girlfriend that he was going to school during the daytime.
Based on his past record, investigators thought Knight might be guilty of more than playing hooky.
I got it.
Detective Sutlovich, I have a search warrant.
A search
Step
warrant?
aside, please. Yes, we have some work we need to do here.
On January 21st, 4 days after the murder, detectives served a search warrant on Knight's apartment.
Questions at this point.
They were authorized to gather trace evidence collected from the corners of the apartment. Fiber samples from blankets, cat hair, the clothing Knight was said to have worn the night of the murder, and even the clothing he wore when they served the warrant. As it turned out, he was wearing the sweatshirt he usually jogged in.
Shirt, pants, shoes too, please.
Detectives found the jogging pants soaking in a bucket of water.
Yep.
They collected the pants, bucket and all.
Thanks.
Knight was read his rights and taken into custody.
Pull that down with your finger.
There, his hair, blood, and saliva samples were collected.
Sting a little bit, okay?
Authorities could hold him no longer than 48 hours unless the tests turned up evidence to directly link him to the crime.
Hold still.
The shoe print left on the victim's windowsill matched the tread on running shoes taken from the suspect. But the sneaker was common, and the print would match thousands of others all over Seattle. Testing the trace evidence was more time-consuming. The pants had to be dried before they were looked at. The fibers had to be scrutinized one by one. Even matching hairs is tricky because two hairs taken from the same person might not necessarily match.
If you just look at your own hair, the hair of someone who's sitting next to you, you could see some hairs are thicker, some are thinner, some are darker, some are lighter, some are coarser, some are finer.
The 48 hours came and went without a definitive result. Knight had to be released. But little by little, the trace evidence began to tell the bigger story. The distinctive shape and pattern of some hairs revealed that they were from a cat. Their length and color matched Knight's pet. Then, Swicklick analyzed Sherwood Knight's pants. Red cotton fibers and cat hair were entangled in pills of lint found clinging to them. The pills matched the lint found on the victim. She still wasn't satisfied.
Even though it's very compelling evidence, I would have to say there is a possibility it could have come from another pair of pants with red cotton and with cat hairs. Cats are not a rare species. The red cotton is not unusual.
As her testing continued, more fibers on the victim matched other items taken from Knight's apartment. His hairs, too, matched those from the crime scene. As incriminating as that evidence seemed to be, investigators feared that no jury would buy a case that was solved by lint and cat hair. They sought an array of evidence since no single irrefutable piece had been found. But they were getting closer. They discovered telltale bloodstains around the waistband of Knight's sweatshirt. The droplets had apparently escaped Knight's notice. Technicians tested them against the suspect's and victim's own blood. Though tests weren't as precise in the 1980s as they are today, the blood was found to be consistent with the victim's, a Caucasian with type O. Now investigators had blood as well as hair and fibers to implicate the suspect.
All these little circumstances would not be sufficient to charge somebody with a murder or any crime. But accumulating each one of these little circumstances, they all add up so long as they're all consistent with the same conclusion, which is that Sherwood Knight was in Molly's apartment that morning and that he's the one who committed the murder.
Investigators were ready to bring him in. The only problem was where to find him. When Seattle police went to arrest Sherwood Knight for the murder of Molly McClure, they learned he'd fled. A manhunt eventually led to an informant who told police of his whereabouts.
How about you, partner?
On April 23rd, Sherwood Knight was arrested. Based on the evidence and interviews with Knight's acquaintances, a picture of the victim's last hours came into focus. Sherwood Knight had faked the first break-in so that he could scope out the victim's apartment while winning her trust. The next night, he broke in, attacked, and killed her, but not before forcing her to reveal her cash machine password. For his crimes, Sherwood Knight received life without parole. The McClure case was solved on the combined weight of tiny fibers, a drop of blood, and a few strands of cat hair. In a hotel in Ohio, investigators had even less to link a killer to the crime scene. Blue Ash, Ohio is a quiet town just outside of Cincinnati. People here guard their privacy. In this story, the names of the victim and her family have been changed. On September 3rd, 1994, Bert Stein and June Mays had come to Blue Ash for a family reunion. They'd left their sister, Rose Levy, in the room while they went to breakfast. Rose had promised to join them, but hadn't made it.
Oh! Oh my goodness, Rose. I don't know.
Rose, is she breathing?
A joyful occasion turned into a family tragedy when they discovered 68-year-old Rose collapsed on the floor of their suite. They had been gone only 30 minutes.
Rose?
Hello, desk.
Rose?
She clung to life,
This is room
but just
220.
barely.
Yeah, there's somebody down. Please send somebody.
From the looks of it, she had suffered a heart attack or a stroke.
Move back. Everybody please move back.
Medical technicians raced to save her. Police arrived too, as part of their normal procedure. Rose Levy died in the hospital. It wasn't a heart attack or stroke that killed her. She had been beaten to death. By the time the victim reached the hospital, bruises and welts had begun to form. Among them were heel marks on her chest and a strange rectangular mark evidently caused by the murder weapon. The medical examiner couldn't discern what it was. Further examination revealed that 2 of the victim's teeth had been knocked out and several bones in her face had been fractured. The damage she received was equal to what a body endures when it hits a brick wall at 40 miles per hour. This was the unforgettable face of a homicide. Blue Ash, Ohio police launched an investigation. The room was cordoned off and scoured for clues. Determining the useful clues wasn't easy. Assigned to the case were detectives Jim Schaefer and Larry Stokes.
The crime scene was extremely contaminated by the time investigators got there, but it was only because of the attempts to resuscitate her.
Detective Jim Schaefer.
Besides blood, there was a footprint that was discovered in the bathroom, and a lot of other items that were later found to be items left by rescue workers.
Rose, you awake? Are you there?
According to June Mays and Bert Stein, Rose was still dressing when they were ready to go to breakfast.
Are you in there?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
She told the couple to go ahead without her.
All right, don't forget.
She'd be down in a minute to join them.
okay.
Okay? All right. No, she's going to take a shower.
She never made it. As the investigation continued, some items were discovered missing. Mays, who left her purse in the room while she was at breakfast, noticed that $500 was taken from it.
Thank you, ma'am. And where did you leave that purse?
Later, the victim's family realized that when Rose was rushed to the hospital, she wasn't wearing a favorite ring and the custom-made pendant she never removed. They didn't turn up in a search of the room. Investigators recovered one of the victim's teeth from the carpet, but could find nothing to link a suspect to the robbery homicide. Stokes and Schaefer had their work cut out for them. Every guest and every employee was a potential witness or a potential suspect. According to Schaefer, everyone had to be questioned.
With the chart of the over 100 hotel employees and over 300 guests, we started in on establishing alibis or whereabouts for each of those individuals.
As detectives began the chore of sending surveys to guests in order to locate potential witnesses, they narrowed the field of potential suspects. The killer could only have struck during the 30 minutes that Bert and June were at breakfast. The door to the room locked automatically, so a person would have to have been let in or would have needed a key to gain entry. Detectives focused on hotel employees who worked that shift and had access to pass keys. They asked each employee to account for his whereabouts during that half hour and to name someone who could vouch for him.
The main object of this investigation at that point became, let's find out who can alibi for who during this time period, and the one person that will not have an alibi will be someone definitely worth looking at.
Investigators knew that it took a sick man to commit a crime this brutal. They were closer to the truth than they ever imagined. Detectives Schaefer and Stokes began to make progress on the Rose Levy homicide investigation as they culled the list of hotel employees. One employee made mention of Elwood Jones, a co-worker who had called in sick with a hand injury. Jones had filed for workers' compensation, saying he'd cut his hand on a metal stairwell on the job. Detectives called him in for an interview. He was one of the only employees who had no alibi during that fatal half hour. They wanted to know more about his injury. They went to Bethesda Oak Hospital, bringing along a court order giving them access to Elwood Jones's records. Jones had checked into the emergency room of the hospital 3 days after the murder with a serious hand injury. The small cut above the knuckle of his left index finger had already sealed up, but an infection festered within.
Oh, well, what's this?
Jones's hand was severely swollen and intensely painful.
Say you did.
He was running a fever.
You did.
Hand surgeon John McDonough was called in to examine the wound.
This was a tremendous blow that he had taken to his hand because it tore the capsule of the joint and inoculated the bacteria directly into the finger joint. It would take a significant amount of pressure to have that occur.
When McDonough asked Jones what happened, he said he'd cut it on a dumpster at work. Not only did that seem unlikely, it also contradicted what he'd told the staff earlier. Jones was left-handed. To McDonough, the position of the wound above the knuckle of the dominant hand indicated that the patient probably was wounded as he punched someone in the mouth. In fact, the injury was so characteristic of a so-called fight bite that McDonough had it photographed to use in his classes. If that were really the cause, McDonough wasn't surprised that his patient lied about it.
People that have human bite injuries try to hide them, try to make light of them, tell you they did something else, like brushing their hand against the wall or cutting it on a dumpster.
The wound, whatever had caused it, called for immediate surgery. McDonough opened and drained it. He reserved some of the fluid so that the infectious bacteria could be cultured and studied. Once it was identified, the proper antibiotic could be prescribed. A human mouth, even a clean one, is home to 42 species of bacteria. Someone with poor dental hygiene can have more. A human bite can be akin to being cut with an object from the bottom of a sewer. At the hospital microbiology lab, the bacteria from Elwood Jones's wound was incubated until the sample grew large enough to be recognizable. Culturing bacteria can happen overnight or take more than a week. Larry Gray is the director of the lab.
The technologist on the workup bench will look at the plates. They will look at the organisms, the texture, how large they are, the colonies, the size, the color.
The result is then stained, revealing more characteristics of the species when examined under a microscope. Finally, the bacterium is identified and antibiotics are administered.
Jones, how are you feeling
Jones
today?
stayed in the hospital while his infection was
Good.
being treated.
How's the hand?
After 5 days, he went home.
I'll get a copy of this and put it in his record.
The doctor told the detectives that Jones's hand was infected with Eikenella corrodens. It's a somewhat rare bacterium that thrives on dental plaque below the gum line. To find it inside a man's knuckle required some explaining. McDonough explained it.
When the hand strikes a tooth, the tooth may be broken or the sharp edge inoculates bacteria, and in this case Eikenella corrodens, deep inside the tissue. I've been doing hand surgery for almost 25 years, and I've only seen 3 cases of Eikenella infection. All 3 of those were associated with a human bite injury.
Detectives felt that Jones could have contracted Eikenella from striking Rose Levy. Now they had what they needed to isolate Jones as the prime suspect. But Jones offered an explanation. He said that after he cut himself on the dumpster, he sucked the wound to clean it. Less than 3/10 of the population has Eikenella bacteria in its saliva, but authorities had to be sure. They swabbed the inside of Jones's mouth and sent the swabs to the lab to be cultured. The results came back. They were negative. The infection was consistent with injuries incurred during the beating death of Rose Levy, and the rarity of the Eikenella infection was enough for detectives to serve a search warrant on the apartment Jones shared with his girlfriend. They confiscated his shoes so they could compare their heel marks with bruises found on the victim. Jones's car was impounded and searched for fiber, blood, or other trace evidence to tie him to the crime. But the most compelling evidence was visible to the naked eye: a hotel passkey. And in a toolbox in the trunk lay the victim's missing pendant. Jones was arrested for the murder of Rose Levy. Prior to his trial, the bruising patterns on the victim were digitally enhanced and the murder weapon was revealed. The marks corresponded with the walkie-talkie that Jones carried on the job. His shoes also matched bruises found on the body. Based on the evidence, investigators put together the events in the hotel room. When Jones saw Bert Stein and June Mays leave for breakfast, he thought the coast was clear for robbery. The suite they shared usually had only 2 occupants. Jones had no reason to believe that September 2nd was any different. He used his passkey to enter. He didn't expect a witness.
Excuse me.
He knew he couldn't afford one. The murder accusation came from the victim's own mouth. On December 11, 1996, Elwood Jones was convicted of aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, and aggravated murder. Because of the violent nature of the crime, he was sentenced to death. The perfect murder has no witnesses. The perfect killer leaves no trail. But the sheer act of murder disrupts the natural order of things and always leaves traces behind. Science is learning how to read those traces, no matter how insignificant they may first appear to be. As a young woman slowly grows weaker, a murder investigation gains strength. To solve it, detectives must extract a dark family secret from the grave. A tight circle of friends contracts as, one by one, its members die mysteriously. The circumstances are suspicious, but there's little evidence of murder. When a woman is poisoned to death, her survivors point fingers at each other. To find the killer, investigators must get to the source of the bad blood. Even when its symptoms are dramatic, poison is a subtle menace. The poisoner is a two-faced monster whose loved ones become victims of tainted trust. On September 19, 1979, Marie Hilley rushed to the University of Alabama Hospital in Birmingham. Her 19-year-old daughter, Carol, was very sick. For the past 5 months, she'd suffered severe vomiting, stomach cramps, a deteriorating nervous system, and paralysis in her legs. Her hands became clawed and nearly useless. Marie, a widow who doted on her only daughter, was frantic to find a cure for Carol's grave illness.
Should I be able to hold anything down?
Yeah.
Good.
After months of shuttling Carol from doctor to doctor, seldom leaving her bedside, Marie was at the end of her rope. Doctors told her that Carol might have a virus or some other condition, but she'd yet to get a clear diagnosis about what was crippling her daughter. Carol's illness was taking its toll on Marie as well.
Marie Hilley. I'm Marie Hilley.
On Carol's first day at the University of Alabama Hospital, a plainclothes police officer came looking for Marie.
Yes, what can I do for you?
He asked if he could speak to her in private.
To tell you the truth, I don't really want to talk to you about right here.
Be right back, Carol.
Carol's mounting medical bills were wreaking havoc with Marie's finances. A bank and a furniture store in nearby Anniston filed complaints against her for passing bad checks. The officer served Marie with an arrest warrant. He was taking her to jail. Not wanting to alarm her daughter, Marie made up a story about why she had to leave. Carol had no knowledge of her mom's arrest. The next day, when Carol couldn't reach her mother, she called her Aunt Frida, who came to see her and tell her about Marie. Frida had news for the doctors, too, expressing her concern about Marie's care of Carol. She said that Marie moved Carol from hospital to hospital before the young woman could be properly diagnosed. She also claimed to have witnessed Marie giving Carol shots. She feared that Marie's desperate attempts to heal her daughter were only making her more ill. This possibility made Carol's doctor rethink his diagnosis. Perhaps her illness was caused by a toxin rather than a virus. He realized her symptoms were consistent with heavy metal poisoning, most commonly arsenic. Often called the great imitator, arsenic routinely escapes early diagnosis, masquerading as food poisoning or the flu. The misjudgment could be fatal, according to forensic toxicologist Chip Walls, now lab director at the University of Miami School of Medicine.
In many cases, the chronic poisoning with arsenic has been missed at the early stages, and the person either goes on and either gets better or dies from the chronic poisoning.
Hi, Miss Hilly. We're going to take a nail sample.
But once it's suspected, long-term arsenic poisoning is easy to diagnose. Carol's fingernails displayed the broad white lines called Mees lines that signal the presence of arsenic in the bloodstream for longer than 6 weeks. Following up on this crucial discovery, nail and hair samples were sent to the lab to determine the extent of her poisoning. That would help determine the source of her exposure and how long she'd been exposed. The samples are carefully weighed before they're put into what's called a digesting flask. Nitric and sulfuric acid are mixed with the sample and heated. The digested sample is then ready to be analyzed. Early readings showed high levels of the poison in Carol's samples, but it would take weeks to get more detailed results. Because arsenic is found in nature and is a common ingredient in pesticides, her exposure could have been accidental, but not everyone believed that.
How are you?
While the samples were being tested, Anniston police received a letter from Carol's brother.
Forensic report. I thought you might want to see what that thing looks like.
From Hilly's son?
He believed that Marie Hilly may have killed her husband 4 years earlier and was now poisoning her daughter. Lieutenant Gary Carroll, now chief investigator, went to speak with Carol Hilly.
During the interview, Carol had outlined a number of events that had occurred to her beginning sometime, I think, in mid-April of 1979.
Carol explained that within a month she'd endured 2 hospital stays. She enjoyed a brief recovery until August, when her illness took a turn for the worse.
That your doctor gives you?
She told detectives that the change occurred just after she moved from her mother's house to her own apartment.
I brought you something to drink.
Though Carol looked forward to living alone, Marie practically moved in with her from the very first day, keeping house and doing most of the cooking.
So much. Carol, honey, we're ready to go.
Within days, she fell seriously ill, suffering from nausea and severe cramps. Marie rushed her to a hospital where she stayed for a week. But when doctors offered no quick solution, Marie abruptly moved Carol to another hospital. Carol recalled that in September, while she was in the hospital, her mother gave her 2 orange pills and 2 injections. Marie told her daughter they would ease the paralysis in her legs, but still her illness progressed.
Yeah, there it goes.
Marie Hilly's behavior prompted Lieutenant Carroll to request the police file on her. He knew that she had been a victim of a series of strange events ever since her husband died. Carroll hoped the files might reveal some pattern.
Back in 1977, our police department had received numerous complaints from Marie Hilly regarding vandalisms, harassing phone calls, burglaries, fires, and etc. Many things going on at her residence.
Marie collected substantial insurance claims for damage to her house, her daughter's car, and her husband Frank's death. Seeing a possible motive, Lieutenant Carroll looked into the status of Carol Hilly's life insurance.
Written with the offhand. Call the coroner about this.
Marie was the beneficiary, but the policy had lapsed.
I'll meet with you tomorrow.
According to the insurance company, Marie had made several desperate attempts to have it reinstated, but every one of her checks bounced.
Yeah.
Following up on the letter sent by Carol Hilley's brother, Lieutenant Carroll received a copy of Frank Hilley's medical records. Frank and Marie Hilley appeared to be an average happy couple. They were married for 25 years and raised 2 children, Mike and Carol. As her kids were growing up, Marie maintained an active social life. Frank enjoyed his role of the hard-working breadwinner, active, healthy, and rarely missing a day of work. But one evening in May 1975, Frank came home in agony from an upset stomach. He stayed home most of the next week. Marie tended to him around the clock. But Frank's condition worsened rapidly. Within a matter of days, he was dead.
Don't lift your head.
At the time, the circumstances were considered tragic, but not criminal. And even now, it seemed inconceivable that a woman could be cold-blooded enough to poison her own family. Marie Hilley just didn't fit the mold of murderer. But in hindsight, Frank Hilley's symptoms suggested a classic case of arsenic poisoning. To be sure, investigators needed to exhume his body. It would be easier with Marie's permission.
I read them to you?
Yes.
With these rights in mind, would you...
She was still in custody for writing bad checks. She denied any involvement in her husband's death.
I'll just sign this, please, right here.
And granted permission for his exhumation and autopsy.
The person at the hospital?
When asked about Carol, she denied poisoning her or even giving her medication. But investigators persisted.
Finally, upon being confronted about having given Carol shots, she finally admitted that she did give Carol some shots. She says she got, it was some medication she got from a nurse who worked at one of the hospitals. Case in, please.
But police were unable to locate a nurse matching the name or description Marie gave. 1 week later, authorities exhumed Frank Hilley's body. It's said that dead men tell no tales, but only Frank could tell them if his devoted wife and the mother of his children was a murderer. While investigators in Alabama collected hair and nail samples from Frank Hilley's exhumed remains, the results from Carol Hilley's arsenic testing came back from the lab. The analysis showed abnormal levels of arsenic along the length of her hair, demonstrating long-term exposure to the poison. The hair closest to Carol's scalp had 35 times the amount of arsenic than on the outer part, revealing that she'd received recent high doses. Her mother, Marie Hilley, was still the prime suspect in the slow and painful poisoning of her daughter. All that remained was the proof. It wasn't long in coming. On the morning of October 8th, police received a note from Carol's Aunt Frida, along with a prescription bottle containing a clear liquid. The note said she found the bottle in Marie's jewelry box. Detective Carroll sent the bottle for analysis. A half hour later, the lab confirmed the bottle contained arsenic. A similar vial was taken from Marie's purse when she was first arrested for check bouncing. It appeared empty, but investigators suspected it might hold some residue. They rinsed it with distilled water, then tested the rinse water. Once again, they found arsenic.
Mrs. Hilley, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your daughter.
On October 9, 1979, Marie Hilley was served with warrants charging her with attempting to poison Carol.
Not make any statement at all. Any statement you make may
Additional warrants were served for passing more bad checks. But these charges paled in comparison to what police still suspected, that Marie Hilly had murdered her husband. Still, they had no proof.
Hire a lawyer. You have the right to have a lawyer appointed.
We had not received any information from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences on the autopsy results from Frank, so we were awaiting those. And during the meantime, she made bond and got out on the attempt to poison charge and also the 2 check charges.
But Marie could not feel too relieved. The same tests that found arsenic in her daughter's system were being used on samples taken from her late husband, and with much the same result. Frank Hilly had been poisoned. The evidence showed that the poison was taken a little at a time, with a large dose at the end. On January 11, 1980, the Calhoun County Grand Jury indicted Marie Hilly for first-degree murder. Hilly received life plus 20 years for attempting to poison her daughter. But Marie Hilly wound up serving only a fraction of that time. After 3 years, she'd manipulated the warden into trusting her with a 3-day furlough. When it was time for her to return, it was clear that Marie Hilly had escaped. But her getaway didn't last. A week later, she was discovered, apparently trying to break into a house. Her clothes were soaked and she acted delirious. She suffered a massive heart attack and died that evening. Marie Hilly was buried next to her husband Frank, the man she'd poisoned to death. Why would a seemingly devoted wife and mother poison members of her family? Perhaps money was the original motive. But since her daughter Carol's life insurance policy had lapsed, there was no financial reward in killing her. Maybe, in Marie Hilly's mind, murder became its own reward. In that regard, she wasn't alone. On the afternoon of June 28, 1987, Carrie Middleton answered a call to check on 30-year-old Lisa K. Chandler in Odessa, Texas. Lisa had been seriously depressed, and her friends were concerned. Carrie found Lisa in her bedroom, dead. She ran to phone the police, not to call in a suicide, but to report a murder. Police found no evidence of a crime, no forced entry or signs of struggle. In fact, there seemed no cause of death at all.
I need to bag this note. Don, give me a bag.
On the nightstand lay a scrap of paper with scribbled notes, but it didn't mention suicide or anything else that could be related to Lisa's death.
I'm gonna take this out. Be right back.
A washcloth on the floor had no stains or other visible clues. It seemed the victim had died peacefully and mysteriously in her sleep.
Morning, Gene. How are you this morning?
According to Detective Mickey Brown, now a chief of police, that was reason enough to investigate further.
Thank you. You have a victim here that apparently there's no reason for cause of death, and this is a young female. There's no trauma, so I immediately become suspicious as to what caused this young lady's death.
Out of her mind with grief, Carrie Middleton insisted to police that her friend was murdered. But without any evidence, their best strategy was to wait for the autopsy report.
He told me to check I know. Look.
Tissue samples were sent to the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, where forensic toxicologist Gary Wimbish tested them.
We look for the drugs or substances with the highest probability of having an association with the cause of death. For example, ethyl alcohol, carbon monoxide, other volatile substances or alcohols that may have been involved. Drugs of abuse would be high priority, and then second with routine prescription medication.
Blood specimens revealed a high concentration of ethyl alcohol found in wine or beer. Though it may have contributed, the alcohol couldn't have caused Lisa's death on its own. With the victim's death still a mystery, Detective Brown couldn't discount the possibility of foul play. He'd learned from Carrie Middleton that Lisa was in the middle of a bitter divorce from her husband, Kyle. Carrie also said Lisa was having an affair with David Dowler, a mutual friend with an exotic lifestyle.
Well, the more she talked, she got into telling us about Dowler, and it began to read like a Tom Clancy novel. You know, he was claiming to work for the government, to be work for the CIA, to be a spy catcher, things of that nature. And she was very sincere in what she was telling us, but it seemed far out at the time.
Because Dowler was the last person to be seen with the victim, an interview was arranged. He was cooperative and seemed friendly and personable. Dowler claimed Carrie was mistaken about his work for the CIA. But he did share the opinion that Lisa Chandler was a victim of foul play. He also had an idea of who her killer was, Kyle Chandler, Lisa's husband. He said Kyle was furious that she was cheating on him.
Good morning.
Kyle Chandler was next on the list to be interviewed. Fearing he was the prime suspect in his wife's death, Chandler brought his lawyer with him. Kyle also felt that Lisa was murdered, but he pointed the finger back at his accuser, David Dowler.
The names of your closest friends that you and Lisa had?
Juan, how are you?
Hi, Juan.
Kyle Chandler portrayed Dowler as an unusual man with a sinister edge. He owned and operated a one-hour photo shop, but claimed that was only a cover for his real job as a CIA agent. As a government insider, Dowler claimed he knew in advance which friends were in danger. He seemed to be right. According to Kyle Chandler, Dowler knew more than he was letting on about the death of Lisa Chandler and the unexplained deaths of two of their other friends. The investigation into Lisa Chandler's death was taking an unexpected turn. When Detective Mickey Brown looked back over the files, he discovered that Lisa Chandler was the third of her circle of friends to die mysteriously. And in each case, David Dowler was mentioned as one of the last people to see the victim alive. 4 years before the death of Lisa Chandler, another of Dowler's girlfriends met a similar fate. Lisa Craig was found lying as if she'd died in her sleep. There were no signs of forced entry into her home, nor any signs of trauma on her body. The only suspicious things were notes scribbled in the margins of her Bible. Craig believed someone wanted to kill her. Craig had a history of anorexia nervosa. An autopsy found no other evidence, so the medical examiner concluded she died as a result of that condition. However, since there was no specific cause of death, he left her file open and saved her tissue samples.
Hi, ma'am. How are you today?
3 years later, the next to die was Dowler's business partner, Juan Casillas. After Dowler was laid off from his job at an oil company, he and Casillas opened a photo store together. In 1986, Kyle Chandler found Casillas at his home, dead on the kitchen floor. The autopsy revealed an unidentified substance in his tissues. Samples were saved according to hospital policy, but no cause of death was determined. Detective Brown now wondered if Kyle Chandler did more than just discover Juan Casillas' death. He began to think that maybe he caused it. Brown learned that Juan Casillas was married to Lisa Chandler before Kyle married her. First, Casillas died, and now Lisa was dead too. That gave Kyle Chandler a direct connection to 2 of the 3 mysterious deaths in his tight circle of friends. But Kyle Chandler wasn't the only suspect. In each of the 3 deaths, David Dowler made the phone call that led to the body being discovered. Detective Brown had 3 deaths and 2 likely suspects. He needed help sorting them out. He remembered an offer made to him by Carrie Middleton concerning David Dowler. She was convinced Dowler was the killer, living out some deranged fantasy. She wanted the chance to prove it.
During the interview with Carrie, I expressed some reservations to her about the story that she was telling me, and she voluntarily said that she would be more than happy to wear a microphone or a wire where I could firsthand listen to David Dowler telling her these stories.
David Dowler may have pretended to be a government agent, but Carrie Middleton was about to do some real undercover work.
Not everybody.
Very okay. Just relax.
True to her word, she agreed to wear a wire so that police could hear her conversations with David Dowler.
Sure, help you. Relax. Okay, let's make sure it doesn't show up.
Detective Mickey Brown also had surveillance cameras set up in Carrie's apartment so police could watch them.
Hear me through this?
Yes, make sure.
We'll test it before you go in.
Put a couple buttons in so it doesn't.
Brown knew that time spent here would either help the investigation or take him down the entirely wrong road.
We're all set.
We had a total of 16 hours of recordings on him on about 3 occasions. He totally dominated the conversations. He talked constantly.
Most of the talk was idle banter. But in one of these conversations, he described how to murder someone by putting chloroform in their car ventilation. Then he outlined a likely method the killer would have used to kill Lisa Chandler with chloroform. Dowler offered detailed descriptions of how Lisa Craig and Juan Casillas were probably murdered using cyanide. And he told Carrie he was afraid she might be next. These were either the veiled confessions of a mad serial killer, the ramblings of a man desperate for attention, or both. His own words made Dowler the prime suspect. But the proof of those words had to be verified in the lab. Tissue samples from Lisa Craig and Juan Casillas were sent to Gary Wimbish to test for cyanide.
The test that we employed to assay for the cyanide actually is a testing protocol that is not ancient, but certainly has been around for a while, called a Conway diffusion cell.
It's a simple device that holds a blood sample in one compartment, a trapping solution in the center, and sulfuric acid on the other side. The container is then sealed and rotated so that the blood and acid mix. The acid releases the cyanide from the blood in its gaseous form, which is then trapped by the solution in the center compartment. The solution changes color to indicate how much cyanide is present.
We found rather large amounts of cyanide present in the blood specimens of Casillas and Craig. The concentrations were about 7 to 10 times the amount that are often found in lethal cases.
The results were indisputable. Both Craig and Casillas were killed with cyanide. To test Lisa Chandler, Wimbish used a gas chromatograph to detect traces of chloroform. A microscopic tissue sample was placed into the apparatus, which was calibrated to show the unique spectroscopic fingerprint of chlorine compounds.
This is the internal standard, and this is where
The test revealed that Lisa Chandler had enough chloroform in her system to kill 7 people.
All right, good.
Unmasked by his own incessant conversation, the real David Dowler was finally revealed.
And then once we verified through the post-mortem and the toxicology results that this was in fact how the victims had died, we knew then that we had our predator. We knew who we had then.
David Dowler wasn't a concerned friend or a government agent, but a very sick and dangerous serial killer. Armed with the toxicology reports and information gathered from surveillance, Detective Brown secured a warrant for Dowler's residence. But he wasn't through yet. He wanted to be sure he had enough to win this case. He hoped for a confession, if not to police, then to Carrie Middleton.
We decided to tape one more conversation to try to obtain as much evidence as possible.
By going through with another meeting, Brown was using his key witness as live bait for a known killer. Carrie was putting her life on the line. By now, Dowler might have suspected she was talking to police. Even with officers just outside, she'd be on her own if Dowler moved in quickly with a knife or gun. As an extra precaution, Detective Brown wired Carrie's entire home and had additional police standing by just in case. That evening, when Dowler came to Carrie's home, the two spoke amiably at first, concentrating on small talk. Then, Dowler began talking about how the police were bungling the investigation into Lisa Chandler's death. He mentioned that he kept a pistol in his car, and once again told Carrie that she was in danger. Then, he suddenly announced he had to leave for a moment, but that he'd be right back. That was enough for Detective Brown.
He's heading south.
Not wanting to
First
risk
Street.
Carrie's life any further, he had his officers move in and arrest Dowler at his car.
Down. Put your hands up. On your knees. On your knees.
From the evidence retrieved at the scene, Detective Brown may have acted just in time.
We arrested Dowler shortly after he left the witness's residence, and we found in his possession a pistol, a silencer, ammunition. We also found some lockpick sets and ski mask that he had.
These suspicious articles couldn't begin to suggest the vast and deadly arsenal Dowler had at his disposal. At his house, detectives uncovered explosives, blasting caps, crude eavesdropping equipment, more homemade gun silencers, and chemicals used to make explosives and poison. The police needed a truck to haul it all away. Dowler's lab was the incubator for 3 murders. Mixing chemicals into a lethal brew, he was able to concoct his deadly schemes. He denied killing Lisa Chandler and told investigators he was only trying to help her.
I want you to be honest about what's really bothering me.
First, he said he had her write down questions about their relationship. Then he said he would help her find a hypnotic state by pouring chloroform into a washcloth that was covering her face. According to Dowler, she would then be able to answer her own questions with her subconscious.
get comfortable.
He said that she was getting tired, so he left.
Yeah.
Dowler claimed she must have taken more chloroform herself to commit suicide. Investigators didn't believe it. No bottle of chloroform was found at the scene. The forensics report also proved Dowler's story couldn't be true.
That couldn't have happened because when Dr. Wimbish did the toxicology, she had 7 times the toxic amount in her system, and she would have been sound asleep long before she could have self-administered that much chloroform to her.
Dowler had administered the fatal dose. He may have lived a fantasy life as a secret agent, but he played the real-life role of murderer. In January 1988, David Dowler was sentenced to life in prison for the death of Lisa Chandler. Because he received the highest possible penalty, he was not tried for the other 2 murders he is suspected of. David Dowler killed for the sake of killing. In Little Rock, Arkansas, investigators found that poison was just one part of a killer's elaborate master plan. Georgia Weaver had recently come to live with her sister, Jeannie Allen. When Jeannie had told her younger sister that her cozy home had become too much for her to manage by herself, Georgia was happy to move in and help out. On December 19, 1992, Jeannie was struck with a sudden, intense illness. Georgia, who also felt ill, rushed her sister to the hospital. For 2 weeks, doctors puzzled over the root of her symptoms, thinking it might be food poisoning. When her condition worsened, they ordered tests for heavy metal poisoning. The results showed Jeannie had nearly 20 times the normal amount of arsenic in her system. Intentionally or by accident, Jeannie Allen was being poisoned. Jeannie's son, Jerry Allen, reacted to the news by going to the police. He was certain his mother's poisoning was no accident. He told them that the situation wasn't always so rosy between his mother and his aunt, Georgia Weaver. Detective Steve Moore listened to Jerry Allen's story.
He told us that they had been involved in a dispute in years past over an inheritance from their mother who had died, and apparently Miss Weaver had spent some of the money without Miss Allen's knowledge.
The sisters hadn't spoken to each other for 4 years. Jeannie had only recently decided to make amends and invite Georgia back into her life. Jeannie was lonely. Her husband, James Allen, was incapacitated with a stroke, and her kids were grown. Georgia began spending the night at Jeannie's house and cooking all of the meals. But Jerry believed that Georgia was scheming to take financial advantage of his mother once again.
Need more pop? No.
3 months before Jeannie fell ill, Jerry confronted Georgia at his mother's house, triggering a tremendous argument. Georgia called the police to have Jerry removed from the premises. Bad blood clearly flowed within the family, but there was little to link it with Jeannie's current condition.
When Jerry Allen first came to us, we were concerned about, were we getting in the middle of a family squabble? Was there really a crime here? Was there really something we needed to be involved in?
But 2 days after Jerry filed his report, Jeannie Allen died from arsenic poisoning. Now the police had to get involved. Though it was still uncertain if Jeannie's poisoning was intentional, the death needed to be investigated. Police began by interviewing Jeannie's friends and family members.
Thank you.
Certainly. Something to eat?
No, thank you.
One of the first was Georgia Weaver.
All right, what can I help you with?
Cordial and friendly, her anger rose when she talked about her nephew, Jerry Allen. Georgia told police that Jerry resented her because Jeannie trusted her more. She claimed that if anyone poisoned Jeannie, it would be Jerry, who was jockeying to gain control of Jeannie Allen's money. Investigators now had 2 suspects, and yet they weren't even certain a crime had been committed. Before they could determine that, they had to determine how long Jeannie Allen had been exposed to the arsenic and how she had consumed it. To find out if Jeannie Allen had been intentionally poisoned, investigators examined her hair. The arsenic leaves a record along the growing strands. The hair samples are cut into segments, then wrapped securely in a paper form that establishes the chain of evidence. Because plastic bags could contaminate biological samples, labs use paper wrapping. Each segment is individually tested for arsenic. The duration of a person's exposure can be determined by seeing how much of the hair contains the poison. According to criminalist Gary Lawrence, it is not uncommon to find arsenic in any hair sample.
Most people have a normal background level of arsenic within the body, and if they receive from some form an amount of arsenic that's abnormal to the body, I think the system has a way of working some of that out.
If the arsenic were in the environment, investigators would expect to find minute traces along the length of the hair. If the poison were administered intentionally, it would usually appear as one big dose on the portion of hair closest to the scalp.
I don't believe it's very easy to hide arsenic poisoning. It can be done, but again, even when you get up to the long-term dosages, even at low levels, the buildup of the arsenic within the body is eventually going to show up.
The report showed normal trace levels of arsenic along most of the length of the hair. But on the segment closest to the scalp, the hair contained 13 times the normal amount of the poison. The results suggested that Jeannie Allen's death was no accident.
Now let's get everything out of this closet.
To find the source of the arsenic, police conducted a search of her house and confiscated all of the food and medicine they could find. About 100 items in all. At the Arkansas State Crime Lab, each sample was bombarded with X-rays in a technique called X-ray fluorescence. Electrons in the samples become excited, giving off specific levels of energy. The lab looked for energy levels characteristic of arsenic. The lab tests for the samples taken from Jeannie Allen's home would take several months to complete.
What's the problem?
In the meantime, police conducted interviews with her neighbors.
All of a sudden, Georgia won't let me see her.
It wasn't long before they narrowed their list of suspects from 2 to 1. Many neighbors said that mysterious changes occurred once Georgia Weaver moved in. Jeannie Allen came outside less and less. Georgia collected the mail and ran errands. Jeannie soon stopped calling her friends. And when they tried to get in touch with her, Georgia was always there, blocking the way.
If somebody went over there or called over there, Georgia answered the phone, Georgia came to the door, and they never saw Jeannie again. It was like she didn't exist, basically. Georgia checked the mail. Georgia basically took over the household, which made me suspicious that a grown lady that was not in any medical condition at that time, no senility or anything, would just let somebody take over their home like that.
As suspicions began focusing on Georgia Weaver, investigators uncovered more to incriminate her. On December 22nd, just days after Jeannie Allen was admitted to the hospital, Georgia went to the bank and, using a power of attorney, closed Jeannie Allen's account. she took $1,300 and the contents of her safe deposit box. Georgia was arrested at her job in a local motel. In her possession was about $1,000, Jeannie Allen's car, a credit card, and her power of attorney. Upon closer inspection, investigators noticed an odd detail about the power of attorney.
Yeah, see if you know these guys in there.
On this document, legally handing Jeannie's rights to Georgia Weaver, both Jeannie Allen's printed name and signature were misspelled. In order to get a true sample of Georgia's signature, police had her sign her name and Jeannie's several times in front of witnesses.
Oh, no, we're not finished yet.
The signatures were sent to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for analysis. Jeannie Allen's known signature was compared with Georgia's version of the signature. The differences went beyond the spelling errors, according to Dawn Reed, chief of questioned documents.
There were pressure habits that were extremely different. Extreme differences were noted between the spacing habits of the writer on the question document and the known handwriting of Jeannie Allen. The uppercase J was a two-stroke J that Jeannie Allen usually wrote, and on the question document it was very flourished.
But when Reed compared the signatures written by Georgia Weaver to the one on the power of attorney, she knew she caught the forger hands down.
I positively identified Georgia Weaver as writing Jeannie Allen's signature on the power of attorney, which is totally conclusive. There was no qualified opinion. She wrote that. The probability that any other individual could have is nil.
Georgia was arrested for theft and forgery. She may have been a killer, too, if investigators could only prove it. Georgia Weaver posted bond for her arrests on theft and forgery. But her troubles weren't over. A few weeks later, she was charged with stealing employee checks from the motel where she worked and forging the signatures on them. She was arrested again. Though she was proving to be a thief and a forger, investigators had nothing to tie her to the murder of her sister, Jeannie Allen. Then, a co-worker reported finding a bottle of rat poison hidden where Georgia always kept her purse. It wasn't a brand the motel used. It was sent to the police and passed on to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for analysis. The active ingredient was arsenic. This evidence, tangible but circumstantial, was the first to link Georgia to the poison. Now, investigators needed to link the source of the poison to her sister. In August 1993, the extensive tests on items from Jeannie Allen's home were complete. Arsenic was discovered in 2 containers of punch and a bottle of cold medicine. The link was established. Detective Moore only hoped it was strong enough.
At that point, I felt we had what we needed to bring her to justice. We knew that it would be a battle as far as getting her convicted, but we didn't feel that we had any other choice but to try to get her put in prison where we felt she belonged.
From the evidence, investigators surmised that after ingratiating herself with her sister, Georgia began spiking her medicine and beverages with the rat poison she kept hidden at her workplace, finally killing her with one big dose. On May 4th, 1994, Georgia Weaver was convicted of the capital murder of her sister, Jeannie Allen.
I believe what motivated Georgia was greed, power, and also probably a motivational fact was that she wanted what Jeannie had as far as a home, a family, the financial stability that she had, whereas Georgia was alone, out of money. And I believe that maybe that she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route.
'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's the only way she could get what that had was to take this route. 'Cause she saw that's But the route she took proved to be a dead end. Georgia Weaver was sentenced to life in prison with no parole and is currently serving at the Arkansas Department of Corrections. The act of poisoning begins with a simple premise. The poisoner believes he can hide his guilt behind a mask of concern. But time and again, forensics has proven this premise false. When 3 women vanish without a trace, investigators comb for clues and find themselves on the trail of a savvy serial killer. Without witnesses, detectives are at a total loss to find a missing woman. To solve this case requires an act of God. When a woman disappears from under her own roof, investigators suspect that she was murdered. But getting to the bottom of it will require some sophisticated technology. Most murder investigations begin with a body. But when the body is missing, detectives face the ultimate challenge: catching a killer when the victim is presumed dead.
Tips hotline.
It was a Monday, June 19, 1989, when police in the Kansas City suburb of Overland Park, Kansas, received a call from worried parents. Their daughter, 24-year-old Joan Butler, hadn't shown up for work that morning. She hadn't even phoned in. No one had seen her since early the day before.
That's interesting because...
Though she had been gone just over 24 hours, her parents were convinced something terrible must have happened to prevent her from contacting anyone. Police agreed to check on her. When investigators searched Joan's apartment with one of her friends, they found no sign of her. And according to Detective Pat Hinkle, no sign that she planned on being away.
No bags had been packed. Her makeup was still around the sink. No clothing appeared to have been removed from the apartment, so the only thing missing was Joan.
They learned that Joan had spent Saturday night with her girlfriends.
Yeah, they're great.
At 4 a.m. Sunday, she went home.
I love you. That explains it. Thanks again. I'll call you tomorrow.
That was the last time they saw her. Joan Butler wasn't the kind of person to leave without a word. She saw her parents at least once a week and socialized often with her friends. She wouldn't miss work without good reason. In her apartment, her friend pointed out to police the clothes Joan was last seen wearing, so she had definitely made it home. But her purse, wallet, and her car were missing. By roll call Tuesday morning, the mystery had deepened. A check of Butler's bank account revealed that $300, the daily maximum, had been withdrawn from an ATM at 6 a.m. Sunday, just 2 hours after she was last seen. It happened again early Monday and early Tuesday. All the ATMs were in the Kansas City area. None had video cameras. The pattern suggested that someone else was in control of Joan Butler's account, and maybe in control of Joan.
He had gone down and played, I don't remember.
Her family and friends posted leaflets all over Kansas City, describing Joan and her car and pleading for help to find her. Her disappearance made the news, but turned up no leads. Until 1 week later. On June 25th, police got their first tip.
Sir, can I speak
Joan's
to you for a minute?
car had been spotted outside an apartment complex 40 miles from her home. The man with Joan's keys told the officer that he borrowed them from his buddy inside. The officer suggested they go in and sort things out. The suspect began to escort the officer inside, then took off. He caught the policeman by surprise and made an agile escape. The officer learned that the fugitive was a painting contractor named Ricky Cho, and the men were his crew. They also told him that Cho recently started driving a new red car, Joan Butler's car. When police examined the trunk, they discovered part of the carpet had been cut away. They also found a dark stain. They presumed it was Joan Butler's blood. According to Detective Hinkle, if that were the case, it would prove that she hadn't left of her own free will.
Any experienced officer would then suspect that possibly the trunk had been used for the storage of the person who belonged to the car, you know, the missing person.
Investigators couldn't be certain it was Joan's blood without having a sample from her to compare it to. They hoped a new forensic technique called reverse paternity could help them. It works on the theory that a person's DNA shares the same traits as the DNA of her parents. By taking a close look at both parents' DNA, investigators could estimate what their children's DNA might look like. Blood samples would have to be taken from Butler's mother and father. Then the DNA from the blood found in Joan Butler's car would be extracted and compared. The meticulous process would take weeks.
Unicorn.
While awaiting analysis of the stain, detectives ran a background check on Ricky Cho. The name turned out to be an alias, one of many. His real name was Richard Grissom. He was a 28-year-old ex-con with a rap sheet almost as old as he was.
Utility to Heather Keaton of Shawnee.
His criminal background included a history of forgery, a history of auto theft, and a prior conviction of homicide in which he killed an elderly woman in the city of Leavenworth, Kansas.
He was charged as a juvenile in that crime and served only a few years before he was back on the street. Grissom's father was African American and his mother was Asian, giving him a striking combination of features that allowed him to drastically alter his appearance. Throughout a decade of crime and disguise, he had evaded capture. Police worked the equation: a young woman's sudden disappearance, a drained bank account, and a stolen car. Factor in a convicted killer named Richard Grissom, and the result pointed to kidnapping, possibly murder. If Joan Butler wasn't dead yet, investigators feared she soon would be. Police fanned out across Kansas City, interviewing friends and colleagues of Grissom, but no one admitted seeing him. After Joan Butler's bank account was emptied, her trail evaporated too. Investigators had no more leads. Then, on Monday, June 26th, David Roosh received a message that his daughter Christine was sick and wouldn't be coming into his optical lab where she worked. Later that day, Roosh went to her home to check on her. She wasn't there. Neither was her roommate, Teresa Brown, who had also called in sick. Christine's car was gone. Neither woman had checked into a hospital, and none of their friends had seen them. The women seemed to have simply vanished.
Good day.
The next day, their families filed missing persons reports.
Hey, you're here.
Both women were well liked, with close families and friends.
Might go out tonight? Don't think so.
Christine, age 22, enjoyed working at her dad's shop. Teresa, also 22, had saved enough money to enroll in college. Neither woman had any problems to speak of, and neither was the kind to shirk her responsibilities. Their behavior, like the mess in their home, was out of character. Detectives combed the apartment for clues. Their wallets were missing, but oddly, a curling iron was left on. It was all very disturbing, especially so soon after the disappearance of Joan Butler. Detectives collected hairs and fibers, including 2 dark hairs found in the roommate's bedding that didn't seem to belong to either woman. No blood was found in the apartment, no weapon, no sign of forced entry or struggle. In short, no evidence of a crime. The front door hadn't been forced. If there had been an intruder, it was either someone the women knew or someone with a key. It wasn't much of a case to hand District Attorney Paul Morrison.
We didn't have a crime scene here. What we had was a lot of different fragments, and so our task was to try to see what we could put together from that and build a scenario and piece together what we think happened.
Detectives learned that passkeys had been given to a painting company, Richard Grissom's painting company. What began as a missing persons case now looked like a spree of kidnappings. The day after police searched Christine and Teresa's apartment, Christine's abandoned car was found a few hundred yards from her home. On the driver's side fender were fresh flecks of blue paint, but inside they found no viable clues. Later, a check of the roommate's bank records showed another sinister parallel with Joan Butler. Their accounts were quickly drained through multiple transactions. But if investigators hoped to link Richard Grissom to the missing women, they'd need solid proof. It surfaced in the lab when the dark hairs found in the roommate's bedding were analyzed. The hairs proved to be of African-Asian origin, like the suspect. That wasn't the only link. From Grissom's employees, police learned that he had rented a storage locker for his business. Detectives obtained a search warrant to have a look. Inside, they collected some hairs. And outside, a potentially bigger clue, a 6-foot length of duct tape, wadded up and embedded with hair.
About every 8 inches, there was a large number of long human hairs, and then a space, and then long human hairs, as if the tape had been used as a gag, had been wrapped around the mouth of someone.
Investigators hoped this was what they needed to link Grissom to the victims. They compared the hairs on the tape to those gathered from the missing women's hairbrushes. But the sun had bleached the hair found on the roof, making a definitive comparison impossible. That, along with the gag, suggested she had been held there against her will. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why was there no sign of her roommate, Teresa Brown, or of Joan Butler? Where were the women now? While investigators pondered these questions, the case progressed on another front. The results from the testing of the bloodstain found in Joan Butler's trunk had come back from the lab. The DNA in the sample closely matched DNA from her parents. Physical evidence now linked Grissom to 2 of the 3 victims. Their whereabouts and Grissom's remained a mystery. As police searched for Richard Grissom, their hunt led them from Kansas City to Grandview, Missouri, 22 miles away. Grissom's own car was found abandoned in a parking lot. It was taken to the police impound lot, where detectives spent 5 hours processing the incriminating contents. They found false IDs and stolen credit cards, some belonging to Christine Rusch and Teresa Brown. Police also found keys to their apartment, to the home of Joan Butler, and dozens of others. Family members were brought in to identify the items. The evidence connecting the criminal to his victims was now more than circumstantial. But so far, it was moot. Richard Grissom was even now on the lam, and police were no closer to catching him. Christine Rusch's father identified 3 rings belonging to his daughter. But still, no sign of Christine. 3 days into the investigation, hopes of finding the women alive were fading. As police continued to dig, they learned through an informant that on the very day that Rusch and Brown disappeared, Grissom had rented a second storage locker in the Kansas City suburb of Stanley. He stopped using it just 3 days later. The manager told police a young woman had paid for the unit, but she filled out the application under the direction of a man. The manager couldn't positively identify Grissom's picture. She recalled that the woman seemed distressed, like she needed help. She signed her name, Rusch. Yet the woman the manager identified in the photo was Teresa Brown. There seemed no reason for Teresa to impersonate Christine, unless she had no choice. Detectives searched the locker, but found no signs of violence or other leads. Then, on their way out, they spotted something familiar: blue paint.
This storage facility had a computerized gate access where you have to drive up, punch in a series of codes, your PIN, if you will, and then it would allow you entry into the storage facility. The poles were set rather close to the touchpad, and it was apparent that several cars had run into these poles in the past.
The paint was similar to the paint found on Christine's car. Police took chips from the poles and the vehicle and sent them to the Johnson County Crime Lab, where forensic examiner Gary Dirks analyzed them.
The question paint chip displayed no differences when compared against known paint that was removed from a blue concrete pole beside the storage shed that Richard Grissom rented.
The blue chip helped police paint a picture of what might have happened in the storage shed.
Our belief of the coming and goings from this storage facility was that that's where he was hiding out. That's where he was hiding from the police, and that's where he most likely was hiding Christine Rouge and very possibly Teresa Brown.
As Kansas City police continued their search for 3 missing women, a final clue turned up on the other side of town, courtesy of an 18-year-old Good Samaritan. He was on his way home from work when he spotted something on the roadside. It seemed someone had lost their valuables, a checkbook, credit cards, receipts, and other papers. The young man decided to contact the owner. Her name was Christine Rouge. Police found 4 checks unaccounted for in the ledger. They were traced and recovered. On the morning of Monday, June 26th, the day Christine called in sick, she cashed them at the drive-up windows of 4 branches of her bank. Within an hour, her account was emptied of $2,400. None of the transactions were filmed, but police believed Grissom was with Christine.
You can look at her checks as she signs them that morning. Clearly, Christine Rouge, very steady, legible handwriting. With each check, the signature degrades more and more and more to the point that the last one, you almost can't read it. And you can only imagine, Christine sitting in the front seat of a car, knowing that what her fate might be.
At 10 p.m. that same day, Christine drove to an ATM in Belton, Missouri, and cleaned out the bank account of her friend, Teresa Brown. Police believed by this point Grissom had already killed Teresa, and Christine was next. These are the last photos taken of Christine alive.
Local media.
Kansas City police were desperate to capture the elusive Richard Grissom.
Sheet of construction paper and called it the many
Then
faces
they got a break. Grissom slipped up and told friends where he was heading. They informed the police, who apprehended him in Texas and brought him back to Kansas.
You grow up in the area?
Leavenworth. Well,
the police still had no bodies, but they had a long chain of evidence leading to Richard Grissom. Besides the stolen jewelry and emptied bank accounts, they amassed a wealth of forensic evidence: bloodstains, paint flakes, and hair samples.
Each forensic piece of evidence by itself probably did not make or break the case, but the consistent thing about all those small pieces of evidence were that they all pointed directly at Richard Grissom as being the perpetrator of these crimes.
On November 4th, 1990, Richard Grissom was convicted of kidnapping, robbery, theft, fraud, and murder. He's serving multiple life sentences in the Kansas State Prison. Grissom never explained what happened back in Kansas City, but police have their own theories. Grissom had keys to the apartment of Christine Rouge and Teresa Brown, so getting in was no problem for him. He'd also done work in Joan Butler's apartment complex and obtained a key for her unit as well. To this day, the whereabouts of the missing women remains a mystery, closely guarded by Richard Grissom.
I think Grissom is a true power freak, and I believe that this is his last act of defiance, that he was able to get over on the police, be able to prove that he is superior in some manner, because the investigators have never been able to find the bodies, and I think that's his last card.
A determined, experienced killer can tax a police department's resources, but so can a killer who acts on impulse. Elizabeth, New Jersey is an industrial town and a residential suburb of New York City. Like any city, it has its share of crime, and its police force is trained to handle whatever might come up, through deadly force or shrewd detective work. Once a criminal is in their sights, they don't give up. Shortly after 6 a.m. on Wednesday, August 5th, 1992, a mechanic arrived for work at his auto shop. He spotted a car parked out front that didn't belong there. He found out the owner was Karen Sherrier. He phoned her to pick up her car, but her parents said she wasn't home. They hadn't heard from her in 2 days. Her family was alarmed to learn that Karen hadn't shown up for work, that her car had been abandoned. Her sister reported her missing. Detective Christopher Kenny was assigned to the case.
The family was definitely concerned right from the beginning. It was unlike her to not call anybody or contact anybody over a period of time. She has a lot of friends located here in Elizabeth. Her family was down ashore, and she would be in touch with someone. At this time, she hadn't called anyone or spoke to anyone.
From the family, police learned that Karen had gone out for a night on the town 2 days before. One of the bars she stopped in was right across the street from where her car was found. On the same day that Karen Sherrier was reported missing, police launched a search to pick up her trail. It led 3 blocks away to the City of Elizabeth Recreation Pier along the Elizabeth River. There, a police dog picked up Karen's scent going onto the pier. And then the trail went cold. The search for Karen Sherrier took New Jersey detectives back to the last place she was seen, the bar across the street from where her car was parked. The owner and one of his customers recalled seeing Karen early on the morning of Tuesday, August 4th. She was with a man named Joseph Zabita. Detectives called Zabita in for questioning after learning that he had been paroled from prison just a few months before. According to Detective Kenny, at this point, he seemed a likely suspect.
The criminal history showed that he had been arrested numerous times in the past, and that he had also been arrested for a rape and had spent time in prison for a rape.
Zabita admitted being with Sherrier the night she vanished. He explained they went bar hopping on Monday the 3rd, and early on the morning of the 4th wound up at a tavern on Front Street. He said Sherrier was giving him a ride home when they passed a man she knew. She stopped. Zabita got out. The other man got in. That, Zabita said, was the last time he saw Karen. He said he didn't know the other man's name or where they were going. During the interview, detectives noticed a crescent-shaped bruise on Zabita's arm. He explained he had caught it in the tailgate of a pickup truck. He allowed the detectives to take photographs for the record.
Once we were done interviewing him and talking to him that evening, we had to let him go because we had no evidence to hold him.
Still, detectives didn't buy Zabita's story. The bruise on his arm looked a lot like a bite mark. To be sure, they sent the photographs to forensic dental consultant Haskell Askin.
I did determine upon looking at the photographs that this was, in my opinion, a human bite mark, and it was a matter of finding the teeth to match up with this bite mark.
If Karen Sherrier made that mark, it would prove that more went on than Zabita admitted. But to match the teeth that made the mark, investigators still had to find Sherrier. The next day, they were back on the waterfront. This time, they brought along an officer from the New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Unit. Again, the search was futile. With no word from Karen Sherrier and no reason for her to disappear on her own, investigators had to assume she was dead. Detective Kenny had no motive, no evidence, no body, and no case. Still, he kept his suspect in his sights. Zabita was the last person seen with Karen Sherrier.
We would call Mr. Zabita in, we would speak to him, talk to him again. He stayed to his story, basically. And we spent about 3 months just trying to find Karen Sherrier's body.
Police had tried everything, from interviewing witnesses to tracking with bloodhounds, and had come up empty. The victim's family applied pressure to keep looking.
Karen Sherrier's family and friends came to us and they requested that we do a search. They wanted to do a search. They felt like they wanted to do something to try to find her. They told us they would go out, they would make up flyers, they would get volunteers.
Investigators agreed to one more search. But then, Mother Nature intervened. The worst storm in a century walloped the New Jersey coast, churning up the entire Elizabeth River waterfront. Once the flooding subsided, Sherrier's family insisted that the search proceed. Some 30 police officers, firefighters, and civilians combed the banks of the Elizabeth River, not far from where Karen's car had been found. But the odds of finding anything now seemed astronomical. They searched all day without turning up anything. Then, near the railroad bridge, a searcher noticed something in the weeds a few feet from the water's edge. He'd found a human skull. It was apparently washed up by the storm, then left behind as the waters receded. It was an amazing find, but was it the remains of Karen Sherrier? The teeth would provide proof positive, except that every last one of them was missing. The search for Karen Sherrier turned up a skull in the Elizabeth River, but without the teeth, the first solid clue seemed utterly useless. Investigators brought Haskell Askin back on the case to apply his expertise. His first finding was unsettling.
Examination of the skull suggested to me that the teeth had been forcibly or traumatically removed from the skull.
Even though the teeth were missing, Askin found distinguishing traits in the skull. The shape of the sockets where the teeth had been, the shape of the roots, and a distinctively shaped bone along the sinuses. Askin then compared his findings to skull x-rays taken by Sherrier's dentist. There was no doubt in Askin's mind. The skull was Karen Sherrier's. Armed with these findings, detectives returned to the Zabita household and served an arrest warrant on Joseph Zabita. Down at the station, he revised his story.
We explained to him what we believe happened. We told him what evidence we did have. After talking with Joe Zabita for a little bit of time, Joe Zabita admitted to us that he did, in fact, kill Karen Sherrier.
As before, Zabita said they left the tavern in the victim's car. By now, they had spent several hours together, and he had slowly won Sherrier's trust. Then, he betrayed it. They drove to an access road down by the Elizabeth River. There, he ordered her to stop the car. They began to fight, and Zabita hit Karen in the face. he couldn't recall how many times.
He struck her. Once he struck her, she wasn't moving. He was nervous, worried.
Zabita left her there. Then he parked her car across from the auto body shop and walked home.
What happened there?
Zabita never explained why he cut off the victim's head. Police speculate that Zabita, worried after being questioned about the crime, returned to the scene and tried to destroy the victim's physical identification. In our legal system, a confession may not guarantee a conviction. Cases are won on the merits of the evidence. Without the victim's teeth, investigators couldn't prove she made the bite mark on Zabita's arm. They had nothing to definitively link the suspect to her. So they asked Zabita to show them where he dumped the body. Police divers never found the remains. Detectives built their case on what they had. Eyewitnesses who saw Zabita with the victim on her last night alive, and the x-rays of the victim's skull. Joseph Zabita pled guilty to aggravated manslaughter and was sentenced to life in prison. He won't be eligible for parole for 25 years. Investigators traced Karen Sherrier's murder to a chance meeting with a sinister stranger. Detectives in South Portland, Maine, had far less to go on. On August 16, 1991, police were called to the home of William and Pearl Bruns. Pearl's daughter, Elaine, was worried because she hadn't heard from her mother in 3 days.
So when was the last time you spoke with your mother?
Pearl never went far from home and always phoned her. Detective Linda Barker spoke with Elaine.
The daughter was very adamant that her mother always called her at least once or twice during the week.
She calls me like 2-3 times a week. I haven't heard from her in a couple of days now.
Inside, the first thing the detective noticed was droplets of dried blood starting in the kitchen sink and trailing through the house.
I saw drops of blood at the sink. I saw drops of blood as you go into the bathroom and in the bathroom sink. Indeed, there was a lot of drops of blood in various places throughout the home.
Elaine explained that her mother was a hemophiliac and bled easily when cut. Pearl had cut herself in the kitchen on the day Elaine last saw her and had rushed to the bathroom to dress the wound.
Want to show you the rest of the house? Sure.
Along the way, she must have left a trail. Aside from the disconcerting bloodstains, most of the Bruns' home was neat and orderly, but the bedroom was a shambles.
Yeah, I don't know where she would have been going, but this is not the way she passed.
It looked as though Pearl was interrupted while packing to leave.
Oh, look, there's some more blood.
On the suitcase were more drops of blood.
Like I said, even a small cut. Well, I mean, it's unusual just that, she...
On the bookcase, Elaine noticed something that upset her more than the blood.
Well, she never took
her
this
mother's
thing off.
friendship
This is
ring.
From her best friend. She got it 14 years ago, and it's never...
Elaine explained that Pearl never went anywhere without it.
And you just now found that?
Yes.
She also said that Pearl had not taken her car. Pearl loved her Cadillac, and it was still sitting in the garage. And she said there was no way her mother would leave without her beloved Cadillac.
The Cadillac might have been the only beloved thing in the home. After 5 years, the Bruns' marriage had soured. Elaine said when she last saw Pearl, she was depressed. Her credit cards were maxed out. Her husband complained of Pearl's spending. Pearl had told Elaine, "I'd be better off dead." She wondered if Pearl might have done something rash. There was no sign of her anywhere in the house. The one place the Portland police hadn't looked was a place Pearl rarely ventured, the cellar. They didn't find her, but they found more blood. It was red, not brown, so it looked fresh.
You do agree this does look like it's blood?
With Pearl nowhere to be found, the logical person to question was her husband, William. He was a truck driver who was out on the road. When he returned, William Bruns recapped his last day with Pearl. After Elaine left, he said, an argument broke out over the same old thing: money. Around 6 that evening, he left the house. He said he went to a donut shop, ran some errands, then stopped for dinner. When he got home, Pearl wasn't there. She didn't return, and he never gave it another thought.
It became very apparent that she didn't just leave, and he just didn't care. And I have a photograph of her here.
Barker launched an exhaustive investigation into the whereabouts of Pearl Bruns. She questioned neighbors. She visited Pearl's old haunts. No one had seen Pearl since she'd been reported missing. Next, Barker phoned taxi services, bus depots, and airlines. Every call was a dead end. If Pearl had left town, it seemed she'd gone on her own 2 feet, or hadn't really left at all. With no sign of Pearl, the detective returned to speak with William Bruns. A casual remark turned into a potential clue.
I said, gee, Bill, you've had your carpet cleaned. And he goes, oh, no, I haven't cleaned it at all. And I said, well, then you've replaced it. I mean, this is like brand new rug. I mean, that's how clean it was. And he said, no, I haven't cleaned it and I haven't replaced it.
But a check with neighbors revealed that he had rented a commercial carpet cleaner a few days earlier.
Really bad stain, but
Why he would cover up such a trivial matter made investigators only more suspicious. By now, 2 months had passed since Pearl Bruns had dropped out of sight. No one had seen her or heard from her. The police suspected she wasn't simply missing, but murdered. They'd handled the case as a homicide. They used cadaver dogs to continue their search. They combed rivers and woods and other places where a body would likely be concealed. None turned up. Their main suspect was William Bruns, who still seemed unconcerned about his wife's disappearance. Bruns drove his refrigerated delivery truck throughout New England and into Canada. If he were the killer, he could have disposed of his wife anywhere. A check of the truck revealed it had been scrubbed clean. No traces of blood were found. In Maine, homicide investigations are conducted by the state police. Sergeant Mike Harriman was assigned to the case. Harriman began with the Brunses' home, if only to rule it out.
We wanted to better search the home and the surrounding areas to see if possibly Pearl's remains were within the home, in the basement, or in the surrounding area, possibly buried in a shallow grave.
On November 17th, investigators paid another visit to William Bruns. This time, they brought a cadaver dog to search the woods around the house. The search was another dead end. In the cellar, the dog detected something. Yet when police dug, they found nothing.
It likely will be.
While the search was proceeding, Harriman interviewed William Bruns. Suddenly, the normally stoic Bruns seemed shaken.
all right.
he broke down and started crying. And we thought, well, maybe we're going to begin to hear something here. And then he just reiterated, I wouldn't hurt my Pearlie.
Now that the case had moved from missing persons to homicide, the detectives analyzed the dark brown stains found all over the Bruns' home. Maybe not all of it was pearls. Perhaps it wasn't even blood. They didn't want to overlook any detail. At the State Crime Lab, forensics expert Ron Kaufman ran 2 tests. The first simple test would determine if the stains were actually blood. It proved positive. The second test would determine if the blood was human. He used an enzyme that reacts to human blood proteins. It reacted, proving the blood was human. But the lab couldn't determine if the blood was pearls.
We had no record of Mrs. Bruns' blood type. So eventually we sent samples of the blood that we found on the suitcase, along with a blood sample from her daughter and the biological father of that daughter, to a private DNA laboratory where they conducted what they call reverse paternity testing on the samples.
The reverse paternity test yielded a match. The blood came from Pearl Bruns. The blood evidence gave the state police enough evidence for a warrant. They returned to Bruns' home and began looking for more blood, enough to indicate foul play. This time, they sprayed the entire house with luminol, a chemical that makes even the faintest residue of blood glow in the dark. Detectives were astounded by the results.
And the whole area lit up bright green, the whole carpet, the wall. It was quite incredible. You could actually even see footsteps where someone had walked through the blood. And you could also see where someone had cleaned the carpet. You could see the motions back and forth where someone had attempted to clean it. And indeed had cleaned it by the naked eye, but the luminol could pick up the blood.
Detectives submitted the stains to the forensics lab. As they feared, it was Pearl's blood in fatal amounts. Detectives concluded that William Bruns had lied about more than cleaning his carpet. But to prove murder, they needed the body. Police believed that Pearl Bruns was murdered in her home, but they weren't at all certain they'd find the body there. Cadaver dogs couldn't pinpoint anything. Sergeant Mike Harriman knew they needed more drastic measures.
We had either the choice of removing the house from the foundation and digging that cellar with a backhoe, or finding an alternative means, which was ground-penetrating radar, to thoroughly scan that basement to see if there was a disturbance in that soil.
Ground-penetrating radar beams high-frequency radio waves into the earth. The reflected waves can detect anything from fuel tanks to power lines by revealing changes in the soil structure. Detectives turned to geophysicist Scott Culkin to conduct the search.
If you think of soil layers being laid down horizontally, they have a certain structure. And if that structure is compromised by a shovel, a backhoe, somebody digging, the soil structure, again, is destroyed.
If anyone had dug in the Bruns' cellar, GPR would reveal it. On the morning of September 11th, detectives returned with another warrant. The GPR made pass after pass across the dirt floor.
We have one depression.
About 90 minutes into the survey, the GPR detected an anomaly, a spot where the soil was disturbed.
We informed the Maine State Police of the presence of an anomalous area, and that anomalous area was approximately 5 feet by 18 inches wide, suggesting the presence of some sort of burial pit.
Something was down there. The digging began. After 5 minutes, Police uncovered an oblong object wrapped in plastic and bound with a rope. It was a human body. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. On one arm, they found a wristwatch with a name engraved, Pearl Bruns. The examination showed the victim had been struck hard across the face. It was more than her frail body could bear.
She had a broken orbit of her eye, she had a broken cheekbone, broken nasal cannula. Pearl bled to death. If she had been given first aid or a rescue had been called to that home that day, she would have survived the injuries.
Confronted with the evidence, William Bruns pled guilty to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years. Bruns never explained why he let his wife bleed to death without calling for help. Police know the couple was arguing, perhaps over Pearl's spending. The half-packed suitcase implied she was threatening to walk out. What is certain is the case assembled against William Bruns.
The forensics in this case was extremely important. I had done a considerable amount of legwork over the past year and yet didn't have the tools that the state police actually had. The cadaver sniffing dog, the luminol, the access to the ground penetrating radar. All these tools made the discovery of Pearl's body possible. Without that, we could literally still be looking for her.
Time was, police had to produce a body to prove a murder. No more. Now, murder can be proven when the victim is merely presumed dead.